So yeah, so doing blimps in Archpilot, and yeah, so I've been so my last talk was on just the manual mode, and so I've since added the position controller and also source localization, and so yeah, this is two of the different blimps. So this one is actually this same silver balloon but painted black because Vicon doesn't like reflection. Yeah. So yeah, that's the outline of the talk, just in case. Yeah. So we've got the introduction and some kind of recap of what I did last, with kind of the hardware and initial prototype, and then I've got yeah, how I implemented loiter mode and then source localization. So this is kind of the motivation. So blimps have a much longer flight time and better collision tolerance, and so they also don't create as much air disturbance. And so the flight time is kind of clear because they don't need to expend any energy to keep themselves in the air, and the collision tolerance is because they mostly just bounce off of whatever they hit. Whereas with quads, if you don't have shields, the rotors stop and it's bye-bye. And yeah, so they also, the not getting as much air disturbance is really important in the source localization algorithm, where you don't want to be blowing away the very thing you're trying to detect. So they also have, unfortunately, a low payload capacity because of needing to use helium. And so that's why they're very suitable for surveillance type of missions. But they don't have, so they're not going to be lifting heavy weights, but they're good at carrying a camera for that kind of, or any other sensor. So there's not really many miniature platforms, especially not ones you can duplicate. And even more so if you want to do auto missions or that kind of thing. Yeah. So these are some photos of our initial prototypes. We found out that latex balloons are not a fun idea because, yeah, if you try to, they deflate really quickly, and if you try to add air to them, they explode in your face. So that one did. And they deflated so quickly that we had to be removing ballast weight every few seconds. So this is our initial gondolas, and that's some of the that's the smaller spherical balloon than this one. So it didn't give enough weight, so we had to add another one, which was messy. So we finally found these ones, and yeah, so yeah, they're hard to get a hold of, which is some of the challenges with blimps, is finding the right airfoil and things, especially if you're not in where you're making your own envelopes. So this is now our current gondola. And so, yeah, we've just got a flight controller on one side, and then Wi-Fi modules, RC receivers, all of that kind of things. So this is, so now I started implementing loiter mode. And so this is the control architecture that I ended up with, just a very simple cascaded, flight controller. And this with some constraints. So yeah, it just moves the desired position along as you move the joysticks. And then that ends up going through the fin class, which I actually did in more detail on the last one, but it's it just converts the 4 axes. So we've only got 4 axes control. So X, Y, Z horizontal and yaw. And so the fin class converts that into the sine wave flapping servo commands, and that ends up going through Archpilot's libraries and ends up at the servers. So we also needed to add a notch filter because there's a lot of 3 hertz noise, because that's the speed that the pins flap at, and the whole thing kind of wobbles like that. You guys saw that in the demo. This is the kind of fit performance we got out of it, which is okay, but a lot of room for improvement, I think. So you kind of sometimes you can get about 0.3 meters or 1 meter overshoot and so on, but most of the time it's fairly good. And so I also implemented a very simple guided mode kind of thing, which just sets the target position of the position grid. And so that was just for convenience and settle if I don't want to have to fly to specific spots, mostly for the source localization, for seeing where the thing is, so I can set up the flight plan. But yeah, this is not really so much for use on the physical blimp, because on that point you just carry it where you want it usually. So yeah, next we applied it to source localization. So if you have like a flammable gas leak or another dangerous gas in a building, you can use source localization to follow the gas to its source. And that's where you don't need to be sending people in or that kind of thing, which you can't fully protect people if the building explodes or something. So we've implemented it by generating fairly realistic plumes using Blimp, which is a puff-based odor plume model, as I call it, and it's as a Python package. And so that gives you a kind of fairly realistic plume model, so we don't need to deal with real odor sources until we've got the algorithm development ready. And so we also changed the parameters so that the plumes are less spotty, because real plumes kind of have pockets of higher concentration in different places. So we spread it out a bit so you get a smoother plume. And so that was to ease our algorithm development before going to the more realistic plumes and then to a real one. And so this plume could be used on a simulated and on the real blimp, because the plume value is sent from the math proxy modular implemented to the blimp, and it picks it up as if it's a sensor. And so it's bio-inspired based on how moths and other insects track odors. And so the cast and search algorithm casts side to side looking for a concentration, and it casts further out every time until it detects a plume, and then it moves forwards until it loses its plume and kind of goes repeats on that. So this is the left one is in situ and the right one is on the real blimp. And so you can see there's very minimal casting, because it starts casting the moment it loses the plume, and the first thing it does is it casts back toward the plume. And so that's kind of optimizations to get the algorithm working as fast as possible. We also implement a levy walk, and so that's a type of a random walk, and it just moves in a random angle and with a move length given by that formula. You can see that's what the items mean. And so you end up with this kind of path because of the blimp's position control being slightly softer, so you end up with rounded path instead of the spiky paths that you normally get. PSO is particle swarm optimization, which is for doing source localization with multiple blimps. And so this improves the performance a lot if you can wrangle having multiple of them in there. And there's quite a lot of literature on different implementations, but no one has done it on blimps that I know of. So yeah, this was only done in Siddle though, because building 5 blimps, it's painful. And so that's the formula on there, which it essentially sets the target velocity, which it calculates by a weight of the target velocity. And then it takes a personal best, which is the position of the best concentration that the individual blimp has seen, and also a weighting of the global best, so the best that any of them has seen. And then also an avoidance force, which is that FT. And all of them, except for the velocity, is multiplied by a random number, so you get, so they don't end up just going forwards and backwards. So that winds up with that type of path, but it's very different every time. So this is also that conference papers have put out, and so they go into a bit more detail of what we did. And so, yeah, future plans is for waypoint navigation, which, yeah, is kind of the plan is to implement some of Copter's libraries, and so that's, yeah, going to be depending on the reworks, and that's how we've, yeah. So we also want to implement propeller-based blimp support. So that's the more common configuration for indoor blimps, mainly because it's much easier to set up, because, yeah, servos are finicky and they die very quickly when you use them like this, which is why it's a problem. And yeah, the fins, they need to be in exact offset. So being able to use propellers, yeah, makes it easier, but they also cause more disturbance. So that's why for source localization, the fins is yeah, kind of a better application. And then finally, the kind of air scale blimp support, which would be more for outdoor blimps. We actually have an elevator and rudder at the back, you know, for more yeah, cigar shaped blimp. Yeah, any questions? Yeah.
So on slide 16, you had the formula for the search algorithm.
Yeah.
And I was just wondering what the subscript G was on the yeah. So you had that second line there. So you got Y next to that. They're your two coordinates.
Yep. So the YK is the personal best of each blimp, and so the YG is the global best.
Oh, okay. Yep.
So you're just getting the distance between that blimp's current position and its global and the global best. And,
okay.
Yep.
How long will the blimp maintain enough lift that it's flyable without leaking down and losing gas for this style?
So this one, usually we need to reinflate it about every 2 or 3 days if I'm actually flying it every day. But how soon it would lose enough that you need to adjust the ballast, I'm not too sure of. But yeah, I fly them usually, you know, a couple hours in the day, and I don't generally need to do too much adjusting during that. Yeah.
And what's the battery like?
So yeah, so on these batteries, I get about 15 minutes, depending on how hard I fly them and that kind of thing. But yeah, a large portion of that's because it's such tiny batteries because of the remaining lift, and especially in Bicon with the extra stuff on it for that. So yeah, and there's also the flight controller isn't is actually quite a high proportion of the total current draw. So yeah, so yeah, improving that efficiency would really help as well. Yeah.
Is this the minimum practical size based on all of those? Yeah, before the size and weights, the material size and everything. Is this the minimum practical size you can make this vehicle, or do you think you could shrink it?
This is probably pretty close to the minimum, but there is still kind of a lot of room for improvement on that. Because, for example, I've got an RC receiver which let me use this without having to connect the ground station. But if I did RC overrides, and I could, because I've got a Wi-Fi module on there as well for telemetry, then I could remove the RC receiver. The flight control board weighs 7 grams, which is quite a bit for this blimp. So I could go to some of the like 16 by 16 kind of tiny FPV flight control boards, and that would help free up a lot more weight, and then it might be able to fit into an even smaller blimp if one wanted to. Yep.
When you like, how are you? How is that? How loud you have to position it? This one, I couldn't see like little balls on it.
Yes. So it's got reflective markers that you place on the blimp. And then the Vicon cameras pick up the reflection because they've got infrared LEDs, and so they pick up the positions of that markers and like triangulate the position based on that. Because it's, yeah. And then that comes in via the Wi-Fi module. Yeah.
I was just wondering if that search algorithm would be used for thermal finding the source. Kind of looks like it might.
Yeah, so if if it doesn't change position too quickly, then probably it could be. It could be an interesting application. Yeah. I haven't heard of it. Yeah. Yeah.
Could you do wireless charging? So I was just thinking about the power seems to be the only limitation for the, you had a practical one that actually was looking for gas leaks in a large building, then you could actually potentially have wireless charging points where the blimp sort of, sidles up to a point and then charges. Does that make sense?
You could do that, although that's depending on how much range you have in where the blimp needs to be.
Mm-hmm.
If you had maybe some form of an electromagnet, so it's like you can actually hold it there while it's charging, and then release it so it can go. Because otherwise, you can see it doesn't really stay in one spot at all.
Yeah.
Like that's where one of the things in Archipel I was kind of not sure what to do with it, because there's no real land detection on blimps. You can't detect the landing. There's not a real definition of it.
I wonder if you could use a laser on a tracker that has some sort of signal thing that uses the laser energy to generate the charge battery.
Yeah, could do it. So also if I'll set the blimp flying again, and if anyone wants to have a go flying it.
We try and send it out over the audience a little.
It's kind of got this thing hanging down.
We got actually for the air conditioning just here. So
Yeah, it seems to be off at the moment. Unbelievable. So you basically wait for the gyro to start up, I notice.
I think this is a good logo. I'm fairly sure it finished. Like I turned off the gyro count.
Okay, so it's just the boot process.
Yeah.
Don't let air pressure make do anything here. Is that what happens with the surveys that start to go, or is it?
Yeah. This one. Yeah, needs to be replaced.
For a security device, if you had this tracking a criminal in your building, they'd be so fascinated that they'd just be mesmerized until the police arrive.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Yeah,
You can add another scripted or events.
So that was fantastic. Thank you so much, Michelle. All right, yeah. So
It does vary a bit, and also the inflation amount changes, which is makes traveling quite difficult. It means I have to advertise in the year. Yeah.
So thank you very much, Michelle. And so the next speaker we've got is Randy. And it's going to take us a couple of minutes to juggle because Randy is also our main recording person. So I'm going to shuffle over where Randy is and take over the camera to record. Randy, you don't want to use my laptop, your slides, do you?
no, I can agree.
Right, so use that one, and I'll come over there and take over that camera.